All right, let's dive into the brilliant and, let's be honest, sometimes tricky mind of Carl Jung. We're going to explore his really profound theory on how psychology and art connect. And it's a perspective that goes way beyond just the artist's personal life and into something almost mythic.
So let's just kick things off with this bombshell of a question, one that was at the very heart of psychological debates back in the day. Is a masterpiece, when you boil it all down, just a symptom? Is it a beautiful, complicated, but ultimately neurotic expression of an artist's personal problems? A lot of people thought so, but this was an idea that Carl Jung just could not accept.
But before Jung could tear that popular idea down, he first needed to set some really clear boundaries. He was a huge believer in psychology as a tool, but he also knew it had its limits, especially when you put it up against something as massive and mysterious as art.
And this is the line in the sand for Jung. He says, look, psychology can absolutely analyze the process of making art. It can look at the how, the psychological nuts and bolts of creativity. But it can never, and it should never, claim to explain the essential what of art. That central mystery, he said, that belongs to aesthetics, to philosophy.
Okay, so with that rule established, Jung takes the gloves off and takes direct aim at the big theory of the time, the one most famously tied to his former mentor, Sigmund Freud, the idea that art is basically a kind of sickness. For Jung, this was a huge, huge mistake. So the Freudian approach that Jung was fighting against basically saw art as a stand-in for something else, a substitute for some satisfaction the artist couldn't get in real life. It treated the work artwork like a symptom you'd find on a patient's couch, something you could trace right back to their personal history, their secrets, and their hang-ups. So this kind of analysis, it digs into the artist's biography, it's looking for the father complex, the repressed desires, the childhood traumas. But Jung's big problem with this was, well, who doesn't have some of that stuff? These are universal human experiences. So finding them in an artist tells you absolutely nothing specific about why they created a masterpiece.
And you can just feel his frustration in this quote, right? Jung felt this whole method just completely missed the magic. It takes something sublime and reduces it to the most boring, common human problems. It just strips away all the mystery. It's like digging around in the dirt a flower grew in and then declaring the flower is nothing but dirt. So here is Jung's powerful counterpunch. A truly great work of art isn't sub-personal. It's not a product of our broken, neurotic bits. No, it's supra-personal. It rises above the individual artist and connects to something so much bigger. And this is maybe his most famous analogy. The artist's personal life, their biography, their anxieties, all of it, that's the soil. It's absolutely necessary. It's the nutrient base the art grows out of. But you can't look at the soil and say you understand the essence of the plant itself, that living, breathing, independent work of art. Okay, so if art isn't just a symptom of a personal problem, then what is it? To get at that, Jung started building his own model, and he proposed that there are really two totally different ways that art gets made. And he draws this really fascinating line between them. On one side, you've got the psychological mode. The source for this is our conscious life. The material is all the familiar stuff of human experience, and the artist is totally in control. They're the master shaping the clay. But on the other side, you have the visionary mode. And its source? The deep, deep unconscious. Its material? Strange, ancient, primordial visions. And the artist? They're not a master at all. They're more like a vessel, often totally overwhelmed by what's pouring through them. Now, to make this a little less abstract, Jung used some great examples. Psychological art, like a play by Schiller, deals with the big themes we all get. Love, betrayal, family, society. We understand it. Visionary art, though, like the second part of Goethe's Faust, is just different. It's bursting with bizarre mythic imagery that doesn't make immediate sense. It feels less like it was written and more like it was channeled. Now, it was this visionary mode that really, really fascinated Jung. He believed it was the key to understanding art's deepest, most important function. But of course, that raises a pretty big question. Where in the world does this strange and powerful stuff actually come from? To figure out where these visions originate, because Jung was convinced they weren't just personal, we have to take a quick dip into his famous model of the human psyche. Okay, so first, there's the layer that most of us are pretty familiar with. Jung called it the personal unconscious. This is where your own forgotten memories, your personal complexes, your repressed stuff, this is where it all lives. Now, for Jung, this is the source of that symptomatic art, but it is not where the great visionary work comes from. Because underneath that personal layer, he believed, lies something far older, far more vast and universal, the collective unconscious. This isn't yours or mine. It's a shared psychic inheritance that belongs to all of humanity. Think of it like a reservoir of latent images and patterns that have been passed down since the dawn of time. And this, for Jung, is the true wellspring of visionary art.
And the inhabitants of this collective unconscious? Those are the archetypes. You can think of them as psychic blueprints for the core human experiences: the hero, the great mother, the wise old man, the trickster, birth, death, transformation. They are the patterns of life that have repeated themselves over and over for millions of years, etched into our collective soul. So, and this is the real payoff. When a visionary artist manages to tap into an archetype, they stop speaking as just one limited person. They are channeling a timeless, universal experience. Their work hits us so hard because it awakens a voice that's bigger and older than our own. It's the voice of humanity itself.
And all of this builds to Jung's final, and maybe most stunning, conclusion about what an artist is really for, what their true role in society is. And, spoiler alert, it has very little to do with just self-expression.
Get ready for this one, because it flips everything we think about creativity completely on its head. Our usual idea is that the artist is the boss. They create the work. Jung says, no. For visionary art, the artist is the instrument. They are the medium through which this living, autonomous psychic force, this archetypal story, chooses to realize itself. In a way, the artwork has a life of its own, and it actually shapes the artist to fit its purpose.
So why does this even happen? Well, Jung saw this whole process as a kind of grand, self-regulating system for the psyche of an entire culture. It starts when a particular era becomes too one-sided, too rigid in its thinking. In response, an artist, usually without even knowing it, taps into the collective unconscious. An ancient primordial image emerges through their work to compensate for whatever that society is lacking. And that artwork then helps restore a sense of psychic balance for everyone.
So at the end of the day, the artist becomes this incredibly important figure, almost like a cultural prophet or a healer. Their great visionary work isn't just a personal fantasy, it is a vital message to their generation. It gives a voice to the unspoken needs and the psychic hunger of the age, and it points the way toward whatever has been lost or forgotten, toward a greater sense of wholeness. And that, of course, leaves us with a final, massive question for our own lives. If Jung is right, if the truly great visionary art is the collective unconscious speaking up to correct the imbalances of the conscious world, what are the strange, powerful, visionary artworks of our own time trying to tell us? What are we as a culture lacking right now? And what are our artists trying to show us that we desperately need to find?